My ex-boyfriend invited me to his wedding to show off his rich fiancé and new life, but my unexpected +1 turned the event into a shocking tale of karma and chaos. I'm a 22-year-old female and Dylan, a 30-year-old male, met at Starbucks when we were both working part-time. While he was repaying his student debts, I was still in college and saving money to leave my parents' home permanently. His parents were unable to provide for him financially because of their excessive debt from gambling. We first became close by talking about our families, but after a while we discovered that we actually enjoyed being together. 2 years later, I graduated and had saved up enough cash to live independently. Dylan, on the other hand, had been fighting for a while to leave his parents' home and was still having trouble paying off his student loans. I therefore invited him to live with me. But regrettably, he was unable to pay even his share of the rent due to the debt. He immediately agreed when I offered to pay 80% of the rent so he would only be responsible for the remaining 20%. We divide the utility costs equally, excluding rent. Even though Dylan and I worked at different jobs, I had a corporate job with a more laid-back schedule, whereas Dylan's job required him to remain on site for extended periods of time. My supervisor doesn't care if we work from home or the office as long as we consistently hit our monthly goals. Dylan was frequently unable to assist me around the house due to his job schedule. I thus had to handle the cooking, cleaning, laundry, and dishes. I knew how difficult his job was, so I didn't mind doing it all. But since he was generally the last of us to eat, I did ask him to take out the trash. Sadly, Dylan would never remember to do it, so I was left to take out the garbage each morning. I can recall a weekend when I had to leave for work. Our entire place was in a state of chaos when I got home. Overflowing dishes, empty food packets, and chocolate wrappers littered the kitchen counter, which was a complete mess. The trash had not been removed, and the washing had accumulated. I was furious, as you might understand. I was worn out from a hard day at work and simply wanted to relax. However, given how disorganized the house was, I was unable to explore around it. In the hopes that Dylan would notice and value my efforts, I cleaned up all day. He hugged me when he finally got home and expressed how much he missed me, but he didn't even appear to notice the change in the house. He sat down to watch his game right away, which made me feel annoyed and undervalued. I started crying. For the first time, I realized how little he thought of me. I'm not sure if it was his lack of appreciation, the fatigue, or the insomnia. I pretended to be all right and told him that I was ready to go to bed when he looked back to inquire if something was wrong. I asked him again to take out the trash before I left, and he nodded. However, the rubbish was still there the following morning, as you can surely imagine. When he asked me for breakfast in the kitchen, I became irate. I informed him that if he wanted to eat, he could prepare meals for himself. I began shouting at him about how worthless he was around the house when he claimed that I was being impolite. He implored me not to be so theatrical and blinked as though he had done nothing wrong. After inhaling deeply, I questioned him about why he never took out the trash. I forgot to do it, he told me. After that, I asked him what he does around the house except returning home and enjoying a beer while watching TV. He began by saying that he deserved some time because he was constantly exhausted after work. I nodded and concurred with him that he undoubtedly needs some downtime, but what about me? I reminded him that I get home from work and begin preparing meals for the two of us. The only thing I ask of him is to take out the garbage. I take care of the housework, laundry, and iron his clothing for the week. Dylan went on to say that none of these things were ever requested of me. He went on to explain that he had a really difficult work and that, as his girlfriend, I should be able to understand that I needed to support him. He even attempted to defend his actions by pointing out that his mother had done the same for his father, so it wasn't a huge deal. This absolutely enraged me when I heard it. Even though we weren't even married, I became aware that I was allowing him to walk all over me despite working so hard around the house. I gave him a direct look and informed him that I would not be helping him out around the house. We were on an equal footing, and I wasn't his mother. I instructed him to prepare his own meals, clean up after himself, wash his own laundry, iron his clothing, and take out his trash. Dylan began to object as his eyes grew wide, but I stopped him by raising a hand. There was more to it, I informed him. He had to pay half the rent or vacate. Dylan asked me where this was coming from after he was stunned. I told him that I was sick of putting in so much effort for him and never feeling valued. He clearly wanted to say more, but I was getting late for work, so I left the house. I had never set such firm boundaries in my life before, but I didn't feel bad about it. I followed through on my promise to do no more than clean up after myself. Watching him dash around the home in search of clean clothing or to iron his shirts before work was gratifying. Even when the dishes began to build up and smell, I refused to do it for him. He didn't take out his garbage or clean the utensils, thinking I would do it for him. In order to conveniently dispose of my trash without having to step into the kitchen, I chose to eat from takeout cartons. He made multiple attempts to speak with me, urging me to be a good partner and look after him, but I remained resolute and uncompromising. When it came time to pay the rent, I gave our landlord half of the total and told her Dylan would cover the other half. I resisted his attempts to fight with me at home, demanding that I pay 80% as before. I ended my assistance with him after reminding him that he never showed gratitude for me when I did. Despite his best efforts, he was ultimately forced to give the landlord his portion of the rent. He never once expressed regret to me during this entire ordeal. He never took the time to sit down with me and apologize for not valuing the household chores I performed. He never admitted that I was correct about the circumstances, which was disheartening. In retrospect, I wish I had recognized him sooner for who he really was. Our arguments continued to worsen over the course of the following several months, as you can imagine, as he tried to gaslight me into returning to my previous behavior and blame me for everything. The final straw for Dylan seemed to be my promotion at work. That night was the worst argument we've ever had, so Dylan must have heard about it from one of our common friends who also happens to be my workplace. After returning home intoxicated, Dylan woke me up and yelled at me to talk to him. I asked him if we could talk tomorrow because he was suffering from a nasty hangover from the night of my party with my friends. But he insisted that he had something essential to tell me. I was so tired and irritated that I got up in bed to silence him and asked him why he had woken me up in the middle of the night. At this point, Dylan began to inebriatedly tell me about how he had met someone at work. He had taken me to one of his office parties, where I had seen the woman he was referring to, so I knew who she was. She was only a few years old and went by Bella. She was obviously very wealthy and the daughter of an industrialist. Her father's constant insistence that she required work experience was the sole reason she ever worked. Dylan went on to add that he was falling for her because, in contrast to me, he believed she was a real woman. I gazed at him emotionlessly because, to be honest, I didn't care or feel guilty about hearing this as I ought to have. We were essentially housemates by now, and I knew our relationship was ending nevertheless. I interrupted him in the middle of his sentence as he went on to discuss this relationship. I told Dylan that I was pleased for him and that, to be honest, I didn't care if he saw another lady. I proposed that we end our relationship amicably and that he leave our home right away. With a frown on his face, Dylan asked me whether I was envious of this new female. Telling him that I was happy he had met someone so I wouldn't feel bad about ending our relationship, I shook my head and smiled. When Dylan heard this, his face turned red with rage. He inquired as to whether my confidence stemmed from my recent promotion at work. Since I had come to the realization in the last several months that we were no longer compatible, I told him that my promotion had nothing to do with our relationship. I clarified that I could understand his desire to see someone else because we had essentially evolved into housemates rather than loving partners. Dylan began ranting at me, stating he detested modern women like me who flaunt their careers, even though I thought he would be pleased to hear me say this. Because Bella only wanted to marry and have kids, he said, she was a far better lady. I remained composed and reminded him that each woman has unique requirements in spite of his ranting. Bella obviously came from a wealthy household, so she might not be as concerned about her work as I am. However, I enjoyed my job. I also advised him to be with Bella if he want a woman like her. I advised him to leave our home as soon as possible and that we shouldn't continue to quarrel over it. He questioned me how I could afford to pay the rent as his eyes grew wide. I told him that I had been given a wage increase and could now afford the whole rent without a roommate. He started yelling at me after hearing this, accusing me of trying to brag in front of him. He explained to me that Bella was wealthier than I was and even owned a home that her father had purchased for her. He insisted that I become more complacent and change who I was. Then he mocked me by claiming that men ultimately desired a housewife rather than a woman who could make more money than they did. I was sick of battling with him in the middle of the night, so I begged him to stop talking at this point. I informed him that he could sleep on the couch until the end of the month, after which he would have to move out. Even though I could hear him complaining, I chose to ignore him and resume my slumber. Thankfully, Dylan began packing and gradually moving out his belongings during the course of the week. I was beginning to get thrilled about the possibility of finally owning this entire home. When I returned home on his last night, I was startled to see Dylan and Bella seated on our couch. I gave him a questioning glance, and he told me that he wanted to show Bella his apartment because it was his final night here. Knowing that I would be returning, I found it incomprehensible that he would bring another lady into this place without my permission. I didn't want to be impolite to Bella since I believed that because this wasn't her fault, I shouldn't treat guests badly. To my astonishment, she treated me with disdain and didn't even care to acknowledge my presence when I greeted her politely. I went to freshen up after deciding not to take it personally. Later, Bella came to fetch some water while I was in the kitchen making spaghetti for myself. I felt uncomfortable as she stood there observing me for a minute. She looked at me with the same disdain as before when I inquired if she wanted anything. In order to take the food back to the bedroom and dine in solitude, I made the decision to ignore her and keep cooking. I was ready to head downstairs after finishing my meal when I heard Dylan and Bella conversing. After dating someone who looked like me, Bella was telling Dylan how fortunate he was to have improved himself. Dylan laughed and agreed with her, and I froze in disbelief. Dylan answered something that broke my heart when Bella questioned him why he had ever fallen in love with me. Because I was naive enough to pay for our dates when we went out and used to lend him money while I was in college, he admitted that he had taken advantage of me. He even disclosed that he had saved a significant amount of money because I had covered almost half of the rent for the previous 2 years. I was shocked by what I had just heard. Although I had always assumed that he might have taken advantage of my kindness to pay over half of his rent, I was unaware that he had been taking advantage of me from the start. After that, Bella and he carried on discussing our connection and essentially ridiculed me in every manner possible. I was about to cry because I was so embarrassed, but I didn't want them to see me like this, so I went back upstairs and cried silently into my pillow for the rest of the night. When I woke up the following morning, Bella and Dylan had left. He had formally moved out after gathering his belongings. I realized that I was at last free of him as I wandered around the house in a haze. The sense of relief I had upon realizing that he was finally no longer in my house or in my life is beyond words. I danced around the house and shed happy tears. After that, I started to clean the entire place to remove all traces of him. I really appreciated being independent throughout the course of the following few weeks. What Bella and Dylan had said about me no longer mattered to me. Everything was going smoothly until 2 months later, when a mutual buddy told me at work that Dylan and Bella were getting married. It all seemed too abrupt, and I was surprised. When our buddy showed me their engagement photos, they looked like a happy couple. I acknowledged that I would never have been content with Dylan anyhow, but I also felt a twinge of regret for how he had taken advantage of me throughout the years. I was thus thrilled that he had discovered someone who could bring him joy. When I returned home that evening and looked in my mailbox, I discovered an unexpected wedding invitation. When I recognized that it was from Dylan and Bella, my eyes widened in surprise. Before I opened the invitation and noticed that he had scrawled something in the corner, I was beginning to believe that it might have been an error or that he had invited me merely out of courtesy. "I want you to attend my wedding so you can see the grand life I'm going to have with Bella," was written inside the card. Slowly, it dawned on me that he had asked me just to flaunt his newfound fortune, his marriage, and his wealthy spouse. I inhaled deeply as I tried to figure out why he would even send me such an invitation when all I had done over the years was look after him. I knew I had to become petty with him because all the years' worth of resentment and irritation kept erupting. I sent in a yes RSVP with a +1. I was determined to make Dylan regret ever inviting me, and I had a scheme in the works. After turning on my laptop, I started looking through Bella's social media accounts. I looked through every single photo she had ever shared on social media. Fortunately, I was able to locate what I was searching for. Bella and her ex-boyfriend Jake had broken up just 6 months prior. They had obviously been dating for a very long time because she had multiple postings with him and their photos went all the way back to high school. Jake accepted my friend request from my profile, and I messaged him after he said yes. I was shocked when he answered, and we struck up a conversation. I told him straight out that I was Dylan's ex and that I intended to invite him as a guest at their wedding. He appeared interested and asked why I was contacting him, but I gave him the rundown. In the weeks that followed, Jake revealed that Bella had cheated on him several times, most recently with Dylan. I was unaware of this, thus it was news to me. He went on to say that he wasn't overly shocked when Bella declared her love for Dylan while they were still dating because she was usually attracted to older men. They broke up fairly badly, as you would guess, and even though she told him they should stay friends, he blocked her from everything. He looked to still be in love with Bella based on the way he spoke about her. I also shared with Jake my own story of Dylan's abuse of me throughout the years. I told him all I had been through, how Bella and Dylan had teased me, and everything Dylan had done to me. When Jake learned how Dylan had spoken about me and treated me, he was horrified. Jake listened to everything and eventually consented to come with me. The thought of my ex and Bella's reactions when they saw me at their wedding with Jake made me happy. As anticipated, Dylan's eyes widened as he saw me entering with my special guest on the wedding day. He must have known right away that Jake was Bella's ex. We feigned to locate our assigned seat, ignoring his facial expressions. I just grinned when Dylan approached me and muttered furiously, "Why am I here with Bella's ex?" He had to reluctantly make his way back up to the aisle while giving me a fierce look because he was unable to cause a disturbance in front of everyone. Everyone got up from their chairs when the bride was ready to make her entrance. With her father by her side, Bella looked lovely in her white floor-length gown as she made her way down the aisle. Following a flawless ceremony, the festivities were transferred to the reception area. Bella was in a different clothing when she came in, so she must have gone to change. Jake and I had not yet caught Bella's attention. She stopped dead in her steps when she noticed Jake sitting next to me. Perhaps still perplexed, Bella glanced at me and then at him. "What are you doing with me?" she asked Jake. Grinning, I informed her that I had asked him to join us as a guest in order to support her marriage. She asked Jake whether we were dating now, looking furious. This was an absurd question anyhow, so Jake said nothing, and Bella's cheeks flushed red with rage. She gave me a sour look and nodded seriously when Jake asked if he could talk to her in private since he didn't want her to make a scene. After they left, I turned to face Dylan and watched our exchange with hawk eyes. Dylan appeared worried, but he was powerless to do anything but sit there and act as if nothing was wrong. The celebration went on, and everyone appeared to be having a good time, but an hour had gone by and the bride was nowhere to be seen. A few patrons began to take note and murmur to one another. When Bella's father became worried, he asked one of the bridesmaids to go see how she was doing. The bridesmaid ran up with a message in her hands a minute later. In front of everyone, she declared that Bella and her ex-boyfriend had fled. Everyone was stunned as they stood there. The bridesmaid went on to read the note in which Bella acknowledged that she had made a grave error by marrying Dylan and that meeting Jake had rekindled all of her old emotions. Dylan stood there looking vulnerable and ashamed as the visitors were further taken aback by the revelation. I was also really surprised since, even though I had invited Jake along to annoy Dylan, I never would have thought that things would work out this way. Dylan appeared to be about to rip the head off someone. Bella's parents sincerely apologized for the incident and asked everyone to take a leave of absence. I saw Dylan, who used to be arrogant and pompous, stand there by himself, utterly shocked by Bella's choice. Although I do feel a little bad about the wedding, I also feel gratified that Dylan's attempt to make me look bad didn't work out so well. The day that was supposed to demonstrate his victory over me had turned into the scene of his demise. For spoiling my ex's wedding by bringing a special visitor along as a guest? Since I shared my tale, I've had a range of responses to it. Some of you believe I went a bit too far, but many of you concur that I made the correct decision. I should make it clear that I never intended to ruin my ex's wedding, and I never mentioned it to Jake. I don't know what private conversations Bella and Jake had that led Bella to abruptly call off the wedding. My ex had invited me in the first place with the intention of showing off by marrying a wealthy partner like Bella, so all I wanted to do was be spiteful with him. Bella's decision to end her marriage was entirely independent of me. I've texted Jake to find out what happened, and I'll provide an update as soon as he responds. Update 1. Jake contacted me. In a lengthy text message that he gave me yesterday, he essentially expressed his gratitude for my taking him to the wedding. He informed me that Bella was scheduled to travel on a honeymoon with Dylan, but he and she had already taken it. They had also spoken with her parents, who were quite concerned about her. He told me that he will be seeing me shortly to personally explain everything. Dylan, meanwhile, had been contacting me constantly since the wedding. In addition to calling me several times, he had written me offensive texts accusing me of being the reason his marriage had ended. I never responded to him, and I had no desire to converse with him. I was aware that I had nothing to do with Bella and Jake's joint escape. Dylan chose to arrive at my house today as he knew I would be home during the weekend. I initially requested him to go and wouldn't open the door. Until he spoke to me, he kept shouting that he was not leaving. He was free to say anything he wanted to me while standing outside my door after I warned him that he was not let inside. Dylan began screaming at me, accusing me of ruining his life. He had apparently already given notice at work, believing that after marrying someone as wealthy as Bella, he would never need to return to work. Why did I ever bring Jake to their wedding? He asked me angrily. I decided to tell him that I had overheard all he said to Bella that evening because I was becoming mad at him for blaming me. When I told him that I knew he had been using me to pay for our dates and his rent for all the years we dated, his eyes widened in surprise. He obviously didn't respect me, even though I assured him that I did all those things because I loved him. I assured him that I never bothered to become involved in his relationship and that I didn't care that he had cheated on me with Bella. What truly pushed me over the edge was when he invited me to their wedding and wanted to show me the life he was going to lead with his wealthy spouse. I informed him that he had no right to visit my home and scold me for something I had nothing to do with. He should be upset with Bella because she was an adult and made the decision to leave him. Dylan began to scream back that I shouldn't punish him for the past and that it wasn't his fault that I was too innocent to understand how he had been taking advantage of me for so long. As he went on to explain to me how Bella was meant to transform his life and how he might have had it all, I laughed. He finally admitted that I had spoiled his opportunity to flirt and woo Bella, despite his best efforts. I told him to leave my property because I didn't want to hear his vile remarks any longer and threatened to contact the police if he didn't. I pulled out my phone and dialed in front of him after he informed me that I would never dare to do that. He instantly stepped back a few paces and urged me not to get worked up because he was leaving. I vowed to myself that this would be the last time I saw him before I closed the door. I have since told my family about this occurrence and blocked him from all websites. In order to document his actions and lodge a formal complaint against him the next time he visits, I intend to install a camera on my door and change the locks on my house. Update 2. My last update was 1 month ago. I haven't had time to respond to the 100 texts asking if Jake and I ever met because I've been so busy at work. I'm glad to say that we did at last. A week ago, Jake said he was ready to talk to me and invited me to lunch. Bella was seated behind him when I arrived at the location. Thinking she was here to pick a fight with me again, I instantly braced myself. To my amazement, though, she greeted me with a warm grin and a kind word when she spotted me. Jake reassured me that she was only here to apologize, even if I wasn't entirely sure why she was here. Bella nodded and really apologized for her previous words toward me. She continued by sharing her tale with Dylan with me. And she told me how Dylan would always treat her well and pay close attention to her at work. They spent a lot of time together due to their hectic work schedules, and Dylan would often gripe about me and our relationship. He would express his discontent and wish he had a more attractive girl like Bella. Every time he gave her a compliment, she felt gratified and began to feel sorry for him. During a difficult time with Jake, she became overly passionate and had a brief affair with Dylan. Dylan persuaded her to end their relationship after that, claiming that Jake was unworthy of her. Dylan kept messaging her, telling her that she was ideal for him and that they could live together. She eventually ended her relationship with Jake because she felt bad for cheating on him. Despite their seeming age difference, she believed she might be content with Dylan. Bella went on to say that she was jealous of my independence and felt nervous when she saw me because I didn't really need a man to look after me. She expressed regret for offending me. I acknowledged her point of view and continued by telling her how hard I had worked my entire life to get to this point in my career. Her eyes were downcast as she nodded seriously. After that, I asked her to tell me what had transpired at her wedding to Dylan. She went on to say that she was surprised to see Jake when I took him to the wedding. Gazing at his face, she became aware of how much she still loved him and had never felt the same way for Dylan. Jake told me that after talking about it in private after the wedding, they decided to flee together after realizing they felt the same way about one another. They were deeply in love and had been together ever since Bella left a note for her family. I was also told that she had discussed this with her parents, who initially became quite upset but ultimately agreed to help her. She would shortly file for an annulment from Dylan. Even though I wasn't totally comfortable hearing this, I was glad that at least 2 people were content following the terrible occurrences. I could tell Bella and Jake were beaming at one another. After eating lunch and continuing our conversation, we finally departed. I haven't spoken to either of them much since that conversation, and I don't want to be involved in their drama. I intend to continue working hard at my profession and concentrating on myself. I'm not sure what Dylan's future holds, but I hope he can eventually grow from his mistakes and refrain from pursuing partners for financial gain in the future.